We continue Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. We are in Pelopidas. Ismenias was taken, carried to Sparta, and in a short time murdered. But Pelopidas, Pherenicus, Androcletus, and many more that fled were publicly proclaimed outlaws. Epaminondas stayed at home, being not much looked after, as one whom philosophy had made inactive, and poverty incapable. The Lacedaemonians cashiered Pelopidas and fined him 100,000 drachmas, yet still kept a garrison in the Cadmea, which made all Greece wonder at their inconsistency, since they punished the doer, but approved the deed. And though the Thebans, having lost their polity, and being enslaved by Archias and Leonidas, had no hopes to get free from this tyranny, which they saw guarded by the whole military power of the Spartans, and had no means to break the yoke, unless these could be disposed from their command of sea and land. Yet Leonidas and his associates, understanding that exiles lived at Athens in favor with the people and with honor from all the good and virtuous, formed secret designs against their lives, and, suborning some unknown fellows, dispatched Androcletus, but were not successful on the rest. Letters beside were sent from Sparta to the Athenians, warning them neither to receive nor countenance the exiles, but expel them as declared common enemies of the confederacy. But the Athenians, from their natural heredity, inclination to be kind, and also to make a grateful return to the Thebans, who had very much assisted them in restoring their democracy, and had publicly enacted that if any Athenian would march armed through Boeotia against the tyrants, that no Boeotian should either see or hear it, as did the Thebans no harm. Pelopidas, though one of the youngest, was active in privately exciting each single exile, and often told them at their meetings that it was both dishonorable and impious to neglect their enslaved and garrisoned country, and lazily contented with their own lives and safety, depend on the decree of the Athenians, and through the fear fawn on every smooth-tongued orator that was able to work upon the people. No, they must venture for this great prize, taking Thrasybullus's bold courage, for example, and as he advanced from Thebes and broke the power of the Athenian tyrants, so they should march from Athens and free Thebes. When, by this method, he had persuaded them, they privately dispatched some persons to those friends they had left at Thebes, and acquainted them with their designs. Their plans being approved, Charon, a man of the greatest distinction, offered his house for the reception. Pelopidas contrived to get himself made secretary to Archias and Philip, who then held the office of Polemarch, our chief captain, and Epaminondas had already inflamed the youth, for in their exercises he had encouraged them to challenge and wrestle with the Spartans, and again, when he saw them puffed up with victory and success, sharply told them that it was the greatest shame to be such cowards as to serve those whom in strength they much excelled. The day of action being fixed, it was agreed upon by the exiles that Pherenicus, with the rest, should stay at the Thriasian plain, while some few of the younger men tried the first danger by endeavoring to get into the city, and if they were surprised by their enemies, the others should take care to provide for their children and parents. Pelopidas first offered to undertake the business, then Milon, Democritus, and Theopompus, men of noble families, who in other things loving and faithful to one another, were rivals, constant only in glory and courageous exploits. They were 12 in all, and having taken leave of those that stayed behind, sent a messenger to Charon. They went forward, clad in short coats, and carrying hounds and hunting poles with them, that they might be taken. That met them. Might be taken for hunters, beating over the fields, and prevent all suspicion in those that met them on the way. When the messenger came to Charon and told him they were approaching, he did not change his resolution at the sight of danger, but, being a man of his word, offered them his house. But one friend to the exile, but one Hippothindas, a man of no ill principles, a lover of his country, and a friend of the exiles, but not as much resolution as the shortness of time and the character of the actions required, being as it were dizzied at the greatness of approaching enterprise, and beginning now for the first time to comprehend that, relying on that weak assistance which could be expected from the exiles, they were undertaking no less a task than to shake the government and overthrow the whole power of Sparta, went privately to his house and sent a friend to Milan and Pelopidas, desiring them to forbear for the present, to return to Athens and expect a better opportunity. The messenger's name was Dryden, who, going home in haste and bringing out his horse, asked for the bridle, but his wife, not knowing where it was, and where it could not be found, when it could not be found, telling him she had lent it to a friend. First they began to chide, then to curse one another, and his wife wished the journey might provide ill to him and those that sent him, insomuch that Cleon's passion made him waste a greater part of the day in this quarreling, and then, looking on this chance as an omen, he laid aside all thoughts of his journey and went away to some other business. So nearly had these great and inglorious designs, even in their very birth, lost their opportunity. But Pelopidas and his companions, dressing themselves like countrymen, divided, and whilst it was yet day, entered at different quarters of the city. It was, besides, a windy day, and now it just began to snow, which contributed much to their concealment, because most people were gone indoors to avoid the weather. Those, however, that were concerned in the design received them as they came, and conducted them to Charon's house, yet where the exiles and others made up 48 in number. The tyrant's affairs stood thus. The secretary, Pelopidas, as I have already observed, was an accomplice in and privy to all the contrivance of the exiles, and he a while before he had invited Archias with others to an entertainment on that day, to drink freely and meet some women of the town, on purpose that when they were drunk and given up to their pleasures, he might deliver them over to the conspirators. But before Archias was thoroughly heated, notice was given him that the exiles were privately in the town. a true report indeed, but obscure and not well confirmed. Nevertheless, though Pelopidas endeavored to divert the discourse, Archias sent one of his guards to Charon and commanded him to attend immediately. It was evening, and Pelopidas and his friends with him in the house were putting themselves into a fit posture for action, having their breastplates on already, and their swords girt, but at the sudden knocking at the door, one stepping forth to inquire on the matter, and learning from the officer that Charon was sent for by the Polemarch, returned in great confusion and acquainted those within, and immediately conjectured that the whole plot was discovered, and they should be cut in pieces before so much as achieving any action to do credit to their bravery. Yet all agreed that Charon should obey and attend the Polemarch to prevent suspicion. Charon was indeed a man of courage and resolution in all dangers, yet in this case he was extremely concerned, lest any should suspect that he was the traitor, and the death of so many brave citizens be laid on him. And therefore, when he was ready to depart, he brought his son out of the women's apartment, a little boy as yet, but one of the best looking and strongest of all those in his age, and delivered him to Pelopidas with these words: "If you find me a traitor, treat the boy as an enemy without any mercy." The concern which Charon showed drew tears from many, but all protested vehemently against his supposing any one of them so mean-spirited and base at the appearance of approaching danger as to suspect or blame him, and therefore desired him not to involve his son, but set him out of harm's way, so that he, perhaps, escaping the tyrant's power, might live to revenge the city and its friends. Charon, however, refused to remove him, and asked what life, what safety, could be more honorable than to die bravely with his father and such generous companions, thus imploring the protection of what he considered to be gods and goddesses, and saluting and encouraging them all. He departed, considering with himself and composing his voice and countenance that he might look as little like as possible to what in fact he really was. Now, while I'm recording this would have been a good time for people to dedicate their weapons and dedicate their beings towards rendering whatever they're going out there to do as a divine service. Of course, that would imply certain principles would be brought in thing, and that's the whole thing. People say, oh, well, these people are Christian, or these people are this. It's still secular wars, people. The globalists want us to fight each other. That's why, the thing's been stirred up. When he was come to the door, Archias with Pelopidas came out to him and said, "I have heard, Charon, that there are some men just come and lurking in the town, and that some of the citizens are resorting to them." Charon was at first disturbed, but asking, "Who are they, and who conceals them?" and finding Archias did not thoroughly understand the matter, he concluded that none of those privy to the design had given this information, and replied, "Do not disturb yourselves with an empty rumor. I will look into it, however, for no report in such a case is to be neglected." Pelopidas, who stood by, commended him, and leading back Archias, got him deep in drink, still prolonging the entertainment with the hopes of the women's company at last. But when Charon returned and found the men prepared, not as if they hoped for safety and success, but to die bravely and with the slaughter of their enemies, he told Pelopidas and his friends the truth, but pretended to others in the house that Archias talked to him about something else, inventing a story for the occasion. This storm was just blowing over, when fortune brought another, for a messenger came with a letter from one Archias, the Hierophant at Athens. the priestly figure, to his namesake Archias, who was his friend and guest. This did not merely contain a vague conjectural suspicion, but, as it appeared afterwards, disclosed every particular of the design, the messenger being brought into Archias, who was now pretty well drunk, and delivering the letter, said to him, the writer of this desired it might be read at once. It is on urgent business. Archias with a smile replied, urgent business tomorrow. And so receiving the letter, he put it under his pillow, and returned to what he had been speaking of with Pelopidas, and with these words turned to what he had been speaking with Pelopidas. And these words of his are a proverb to this day amongst Greeks. And you wonder who came up with the proverbs in the Bible and which ones they could have included but didn't include. And sort of in the Islamic tradition, what they call the hadith, a hadathana, but the inspired sayings of Muhammad are sort of a proverb sort of context, aren't they? Well, some of them would be Psalms or Lamentations or something, but now when the opportunity seemed convenient for the action, they set out in two companies. Pelopidas and Pelopidas with their party went against Leontidas and Hypates that lived near together. Haran and Milan against Archias and Philip, having put on women's apparel over their breastplates, and thick garlands of fir and pine to shade their faces. And so, as soon as they came to the door, the guest clapped and gave a huzzah, supposing them to be the women they expected. But when the conspirators had looked about the room and carefully marked all that were at the entertainment, they drew their swords, and making at Archias and Philip amongst the tables, disclosed who they were. Pelopidas persuaded some few of his guests to sit still, and those that got up and endeavored to assist the polemarch, being drunk, were easily dispatched. But Pelopidas and his party met with a harder task, as they attempted Leontidas, a sober and formidable man, and when they came to his house, found his door shut, he being already gone to bed. They knocked a long time before any one would answer, but at last a servant that heard them coming out, and unbarring the door, as soon as the gate gave way, they rushed in, and overturning the man, made all haste to Leontidas's chamber. But Leontidas, guessing at the matter by the noise and running, leaped from his bed and drew his dagger, but forgot to put out the lights, and by that means make them fall foul of one another in the dark. As it was, being easily seen by reason of the light, he received them at his chamber door, and stabbed Kephisodoros, the first man that entered, on his hailing the next that he engaged was Pelopidas, and the passage being narrow, and Kephisodoros's body Kephisodoros's body laying in the way, and there was a fierce and dangerous conflict. At last Pelopidas prevailed, and having killed Leontidas, he and his companions went in pursuit of Hypatis, and after the same manner broke into his house. He perceived the design and fled to his neighbors, but they closely followed and caught and killed him. I'm trying to say this in a Greek way, but we don't have Greek letters, so yeah. This done, they joined Milan and sent to hasten the exiles they had left in Attica, and called upon the citizens to maintain their liberty, and taking down their spoils from the porches, and breaking open all the armorers' shops that were near, equipped those that came to their assistance. Epaminondas and Gorgidas came in already armed, with a gallant train of young men, and the best of the old. Now the city was in a great excitement and confusion, a great noise and hurry lights set up in every house, men running here and there. However, the people did not, as yet, gather into a body, but, amazed at the proceedings, and not clearly understanding the matter, waited for the day, and therefore the Spartan officers were thought to have been in fault for not falling on at once, since their garrison consisted of about 1,500 men, and many of the citizens ran to them, but, alarmed with the noise, the fires, and the confused running of the people, they kept quietly within the Cadmea. As soon as they appeared, the exiles from Attica came in armed, and there was a general assembly of the people. Epaminondas and Gorgidas brought forth Pelopidas and his party, encompassed by the priests, who held out garlands and exhorted the people to fight for their country and what they considered to be divinity. The assembly, at their appearance, rose up in a body, and with shouts and acclamations received the men as their deliverers and benefactors. And aside from potential principles involved, one of the things that we find is that obviously self-defense and the national interest is made first, but we find that people are a lot more careful and deliberate when you at least throw in the mention of divine service. I mean, there's exceptions, but I'm saying in general. Then Pelopidas, being chosen chief captain of Boeotia, together with Milan and Chron, proceeded at once to blockade the citadel and stormed it on all sides, being extremely desirous to expel the Lacedaemonians and free the Cadmea before an army could come from Sparta to their relief, and he just so narrowly succeeded that they, having surrendered on terms and departed on their way home, met Cleombrotus at Megara, marching towards Thebes with a considerable force. The Spartans condemned and executed Pelopidas and Archisis, two of their governors, at Thebes, and Lesonoridas the third, being severely fined, and fled to Peloponnesus, this action so closely resembling that of Thrasybulus in the courage of the actors, the danger, the encounters, and equally crowned with success, was called the sister of it by the Greeks, for we can scarcely find any other examples where so small and weak a party of men by bold courage overcame such numerous and powerful enemies, or brought greater blessings to their country by so doing. But the subsequent change of affairs made this action the more famous, for the war which forever ruined the pretensions of Sparta to command, and put an end to the supremacy she then exercised alike by sea and by land, proceeded from that night in which Pelopidas, not surprising any fort or castle or citadel, but coming the 12th man to a private house, loosed and broke, if we may speak truth in metaphor, the chains of the Spartans' sway, which before seemed of adamant and indissoluble. But now the Lacedaemonians invading Boeotia with a great army, the Athenians, affrighted at the danger, declared themselves no allies to Thebes, and, prosecuting those that stood for the Boeotian interest, executed some and banished and fined others, and the cause of Thebes, destitute of allies, seemed in a desperate condition. But Pelopidas and Gorgidas, holding the office of captains of Boeotia, designing to breed a quarrel between the Lacedaemonians and Athenians, made this contrivance. One Sphodrias, a Spartan, a man famous indeed for courage in battle, but of no sound judgment, full of ungrounded hopes and foolish ambition, was left with an army at Thespia to receive and succor the Theban renegades. To him Pelopidas and his colleagues privately sent a merchant one of their friends with money, and what proved more efficient advice, that it more became a man of his worth to set upon some great enterprise, and that he should, making a sudden incursion on the unprotected Athenians, surprise Piraeus, since nothing could be so grateful to Sparta as to take Athens, and the Thebans of course would not stir to the assistance of men whom they now hated and looked upon as traitors. Sphodrius, being at last wrought upon, marched into Attica by night with his army, and advanced as far as Eleusis, but there his soldiers' hearts failing, after exposing his project and involving the Spartans in a dangerous war, he retreated to Thespia. After this, the Athenians zealously sent supplies to Thebes, and putting to sea, sailed to many places, and offered support and protection to all those of the Greeks who were willing to revolt. The Thebans, meantime, singly having many skirmishes with the Spartans in Boeotia, and fighting some battles, not great indeed, but important as training and instructing them, thus had their minds raised and their bodies inured to labor, and gained both experience and courage by these frequent encounters, insomuch that we have it related that Antalcidas the Spartan said to Agesilaus, returning wounded from Boeotia, indeed, the Thebans had paid you handsomely for instructing them in the art of war against their wills. In truth, however, Agesilaus was not their master in this, but those that prudently and opportunely, as men do young dogs, set them on their enemies, and brought them safely off, after they had tasted the sweets of victory and resolution. Of all those leaders, Pelopidas deserves the most honor, as, after they had once chosen him general, he was every year in command as long as he lived, either captain of the sacred band, or, what was most frequent, chief captain of Boeotia. About Plataea and Thespia, the Spartans were routed and put to flight, and Pelopidas, that surprised the Cadmea, slain at Tanagra. A considerable force was worsted, and the leader Pelopidas killed. But these encounters, though they raised the victor's spirits, did not thoroughly dishearten the unsuccessful, for there was no set battle or regular fighting, but mere incursions on advantage, in which, according to occasion, they charged, retired again, or pursued. But the battle at Tagaira, which seemed a prelude to Leuctra, won Pelopidas great reputation, for none of the other commanders could claim any hand in the design. Nor the enemies any show of victory. The city of the Orchomenians, siding with the Spartans, and having received 2 companies for its guard, he kept a constant eye upon it, and watched his opportunity, hearing that the garrison had moved into Locris, and hoping to find Orchomenus defenseless, he marched with his sacred band and for some few horsemen. But when he approached the city and found that a reinforcement of the garrison was on its march from Sparta, he made a circuit round the foot of the mountains, and retreated with his little army through Tagara, and, being the only way he could pass, for the river Melas, almost as soon as it rises, spreads itself into marshes and navigable pools, and makes all the plain between impassable. A little below the marshes stands the temple and oracle of Apollo Tagaraus, forsaken not long before that time, having flourished till the Median Wars. Echecrates, then, being priest, here they profess that the entity was born. The neighboring mountain is called Delos, and there the river Melas comes again into a channel. Beyond the temples rises 2 springs, admirable for the sweetness, abundance, and coolness of the streams. One they called Phoenix, and the other Elaa, even to the present time, as if Lucina had not been delivered between 2 trees, but mountains. A place hard by called Batum is shown, where they say she was affrighted by the appearance of a boar, and the stories of the python and Titaus are in like manner appropriated by these localities. I omit many of the points that are used as arguments, for our tradition does not rank this entity amongst those that were born and then make immortal, as Hercules and Bacchus, whom their virtue raised above a mortal and passable condition, but Apollo is one of the eternal, unbegotten entities, a causal, if we may collect any certainty concerning these things from the statement of the oldest and wisest in such subjects. Now, perhaps some of the names and stuff, I would definitely agree with that it's really referring to God itself, right? But these incarnation things, if that's present, that's kind of maybe an indication that this entity, I don't know how old the shrine is, but a lot of these beings are just put so ancient in prehistory that it becomes easier for people to go and treat them as divinities.